than usual. But welcome back to Path to Profit that I host every single month on the on the third Thursday of the month. And we are looking forward to having you guys here. So I really appreciate for you guys joining live as well as watching us in live recordings on every month and giving us your feedback, your shares, your thumbs up. It really helps us to be able to know that we are delivering the maximum value and helping you shape and build your business. So thank you. Welcome to the series. We're really excited to be here, and I'm really looking forward for us to start our conversation today. And the topic of our conversation is continuing on the roundtable that we had at the beginning of the month and really talking about the end-to-end process optimization. And today we're going to speak more about that, which I'm really excited. It's a very important topic. I often always say it's two ways to get more profitable or get more profitability at the bottom line. One is to make more revenue, but at the same time, the second time is to optimize what you already have in terms of processes and stop bleeding the profit leaks, which are often hidden in our processes and our workflows. So super excited for us to start here. But before we dive in, I really want to reconnect this conversation around the roundtable that we've hosted this month. And in that session, when we talked about the symptoms the companies experience are when they are scaling, which often we're seeing them after an approval bottleneck, sampling loops, delayed launches, constant firefighting, and teams revisiting the same decisions over and over again. And one thing became very clear when we had that conversation is that most operational chaoses inside the fashion and retail business is not very random. It's actually designed into the system. And I know that sounds uncomfortable, but after years of working across both manufacturing and retail sides of this industry, that pattern we are continuing to see. And we see that across medium sized companies, large sized companies, and even companies who already just started and they are just starting to generate revenue. And we're already seeing inefficiencies that have been built into the process because it was never thought through end to end. Teams are working incredibly harder when we are in this mode of scaling. But when the business itself was really never structured or designed to support the complexity that came with the growth. And eventually growth starts to be exposing us to revenue increases, where we're seeing their profitability actually is dropping while our revenue increases, or it becomes inconsistent. Lead times tend to expand longer than we anticipated. Decision making starts to slow down, and inventory starts to get heavier while margins becoming harder to protect. And leadership starts to question, right? This to questioning you, most likely. You might be in a leadership role and questioning as well your team. Is why does everything suddenly feel harder than it should? That question is usually the beginning of the structural realization. Now, for those of you who have not really met me, I'd love to first take a moment and introduce myself if you are joining us live or rewatching our replay for the first time. My name is Evgenia Alexandrovna Yushkova, or simply Yay, and I'm a founder of Yushkova Design, also known as Yay Designs, a strategic fashion business consultancy focused on redesigning the economics and the operational system behind the fashion, retail, and consumer product companies. My personal background is heavily rooted in merchandising, supply chain, design, as well as operational transformation, through the lens of merchandising architecture, supply chain optimization, and lean system design. I am also a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt certified, and a large part of my work focuses on applying the Lean Agile and Lean Six Sigma methodology specifically inside fashion and retail environment. And fashion business are very different from a traditional operations environments where demands shifting much faster in our industry. Product cycles move faster And the creative and emotional decision making often overrides the operational discipline. So the systems behind the business needs to be really designed differently than we would typically see in a traditional manufacturer and traditional business. And this is where we're coming in with our expertise. While we have sat both on manufacturing as well as on the retail side, gives us a perspective of a holistic approach of what really needs to happen through the end-to-end process in order for us to be able to be successful, to grow, whether you're a manufacturer or whether you are just doing retail of other brands, or potentially even having your own private label, which this is where we focus, highly focus on building private labels as well for large retailers, while we're helping smaller and mid-sized brands to grow and get more profitable at the bottom line. And that's what our focus is, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So really, when we are looking at how margins, behavior, or inventory flow, or supply chain architecture, operational cadence, and decision systems actually behave under pressure, we really be able to see and reveal the opportunities for us to optimize, because that's where the business really either it's stabilized or quietly beginning to leak profit. And today we're going to move from diagnostic to really redesigning that process of where does it actually takes for us to redesign the process or optimize this process. This session is not about identifying really a problem. We've done that in the first roundtable. So if you have not seen the roundtable, the link in the comments will have a way for you guys to watch a replay. Highly recommend, because we've really talked about how to diagnose some of those problems in your process. And this session is really going to be more focusing about how we're going to solve it. And it's really about understanding how the high performing optimization redesign the system behind the product development and operations so that the growth stops creating chaos. By the end of the today, my goal is simple. I want you guys to walk away with the framework to map your current process, a way to identify where the profit and times are leaking, and clearly understand of how the redesign operations for your speed, for margin protection and scalability. So as we go through today's session, I want you to keep your own organization in mind. Not an ideal version, but what is actually happening now in the reality within your organization. Let's start with something that companies often misunderstand, is that they think profitability is most likely driven by price, supplier negotiation, or cost reduction. Does that sound familiar within your organization? And yes, those things matter, and they matter a lot. But what many companies underestimate is how much profit is lost internally through the process. Every delay, every unclear approval, every duplicate decision, every simple revision, every handoff between departments, this is where we're leaking profits, because for every one of those, you are spending more time and money on resources, and you're tying up those resources into be able to do some of those reworks, while instead of focusing on your growth and the business. And that is why often your teams are feeling the pressure of feeling like they're being overworked. Those are not just an operational efficiencies, they're financial leakages. And the damages, really, the dangerous part of those is that those costs rarely appear cleanly on your P&L. They show up really indirectly if you think about it. If you're seeing compressed timelines, right, expediting freight or overproduction or higher return rates, or potentially you're looking at the markdowns and they're extremely high, or your team feeling like they've been burned out, or your inventory seems like to be imbalanced. This is when we start to really see that there are some issues potentially within the process that we might want to optimize. And because the costs are fragmented across departments, most companies never calculate the total operational cost of efficiency. That is why I always say your process is not just the workflow. Your process is either a profit engine or a profit leak. There are not neutral, there's really no neutral process that exists out there. So the real question becomes, is your current operating model designed for scale or designed for a firefighting? We're all going at 100 miles an hour, and I am sure you and your team are feeling that you're constantly putting out fires. And while we are not able to avoid a lot of the times these fires, we can predict that they potentially might happen and have a process in place that could be resilient and can actually help us go through this so that it does not feel like we're constantly putting out fires, and actually being strategic and proactive of what anticipated to come. Now, let's get into one of the most important operational tools you can use is value stream mapping. And this is where most companies discover something very uncomfortable. Most teams experience their process every day, but they never actually see the process. And when you finally map out the process visually from concept to consumer, the amount of invisible waste becomes very obvious. I often have founders who are coming into us and I ask the question, do you actually have a process, end-to-end process mapped out? And the answer I often get, yes, we do. We have SOPs. Well, I often have to remind them that SOPs is a product that comes after actual process itself. It's a capturing of how to guide of how to use that particular process. It is not the process itself. So if you and your organization currently are sitting on SOPs, but you do not have a process map for every process of your department and as well as how it integrates into your end-to-end process, you most likely are missing out on ability to see the potential places where you can optimize. As you remember, I always talk about continuous improvement. And this is one of the number one things that we would like to walk away from today. That continuous improvement starts with first visualizing your existing process that you're currently experiencing. And that process should never be visualized by just stakeholders at the leadership side. You actually need to involve your process users and have them help you to map out that process itself. Because what you might be envisioning, what the process actually is or should be, that might not be the actual process that is used or followed by your team. Not because they're doing things wrong or because they're being inefficient or not obedient to your process, is because a lot of the times when you are actually operating into day to day, there are other things come up that were never probably pre-thought in the process itself. And so this is why it's periodically important, even if you do have a process map, is to actually verify it with your process users whether that's still valid today or whether there were new process steps entered in or created around your existing process just to be able to move things forward or potentially that camouflage some of the other inefficiencies or lack of systems to be able to help to support your team to follow your actual initial process. When we write out when we create the process entry and we visualize it in the process map, we are now able to actually do and perform value stream mapping. You cannot do value stream mapping without mapping out your process first. So that's a number one step, and that's what's going to be very important to make sure that we actually follow. And when I say we're looking at now where the times are potentially wasted or where it is steps that are value added, non value added, and essential. And I'm often asked, well, what does that mean? Well, the question is always needs to be whether this particular step or this particular steps in our process are actually bringing value to our end consumer by allowing us to ship faster, allowing us to get the product on to the floor faster, allowing us to bring new product into the market faster. I mean, all of those value added steps that are incredibly important in order for you to be able to grow and build your business and keep your consumer happy. Some of the steps might have to be essential, especially when it comes around approvals, or potentially doing certain testings that you have to do for to be able to claim that there are, not your products are not hazardous, or your products are actually can withhold 100 washes and whatsoever. So some of those approval processes, some of the logistical processes, unfortunately, have to be sometimes called marked as essential, even though they really don't add as much value to our end consumer. And the rest of the steps that are left are usually what we call them non-value add steps. And believe it or not, we have not seen even one end-to-end process that we have mapped out for our clients where we were not able to identify 40 to 50% of those steps that were actually captured in those process map of the real processes are actually non-value added steps. And those are the steps that are actually hiding the waste. And when we're talking about the waste, it's really about wasting the time in waiting of approvals. Potentially, you're wasting because you're getting multiple sample rounds. Maybe you are having repeated approvals that needs to happen, or maybe you have a constant revisions or revisions decisions that really happening even after sign off. All of those things become our non-value activities that we need to solve for and optimize. And that's what really is interesting, that in fashion is that many organizations accidentally normalize the nonprofit value added steps around because it becomes emotionally associated with the creativity. It's important to understand that, and it's important to recognize that it's unavoidable. And when we are working with creative people within our teams, it most likely going to happen. So this is why continuous improvement is very important, and having control measures of your processes put in place at the end that you can actually see to make sure that things are staying within balance and in control versus going out of the control. So now that we've identified what are our value added, non-value added steps or essentials, we now want to restructure, redesign, or optimize our process where we can cut out as many non-value added steps as possible. This is where we might want to look at automations. This is where we might want to look at AI agents. This is where we might want to look at systems like PLM, ERP, order process systems, potentially order management systems, or also we can look at inventory management systems. I mean, systems is a big aspect of us be able to streamline certain things, creating maybe vendor portals. But you can't create or decide which systems you need until you understand which non-value added steps you're trying to cut and what it actually looks like within your end-to-end process itself. When we look at also some of the inefficiencies that I earlier mentioned, like multiple sample rounds, repeated approvals, constant revisions, or revisions decisions after sign off, often they are interpreted as being really thorough, or we're trying to be very creative, or we're trying to be detailed oriented. But operationally, many of them are forming waste. And once waste becomes culturally normalized, margin erosions follow quietly. So when we run value stream mapping workshops with our teams, we bring things together, like and departments together, like merchandising, design, product development, sourcing, planning, operations. And like I mentioned earlier, we don't just bring in the main stakeholders or management team, we also are inviting the actual process users or people who are on the team actually experiencing the process, which are the buyers, the designers, the technical designers, your sourcing team members that are potentially working with you, planning team members who are actually in the trenches doing the work. And then we map every major step where the decisions happen. How long do they actually take? We measure it so that we can consistently decide on what we're going to prioritize to optimize, because you cannot optimize everything at once. But we need to first allocate and measure what it actually takes. And if you don't know what it actually takes, or if your team doesn't know what it actually takes, that's the first takeaway for them, is to actually take the time and do the time study and actually measure it so that they can come back to you and let you know what it looks like, so that you guys can then use that data to prioritize. Where decision when we map out, we look at those major steps where the decisions happen, right? We look at what inputs are required and where potentially the work stops moving completely, or who owns them. That's another big important piece, is to identify who actually owns those steps, who is responsible, who is accountable for it. And one of the biggest misconception companies have is that the delays happen because teams are slow. In reality, most delays happen because the decisions are structured and how it's structured incorrectly, or potentially doesn't even exist, this actual formal structure. A merchant is waiting for on a design is waiting on sourcing is waiting on costing, and operation is waiting on approvals. Does that sound familiar in your organization? But nobody yet owns the total elapsed time of all the waiting time periods. So the departments measure productivity individually, while the customer experience are actually experiencing then the total delay. That's one of the biggest operational disconnects in the growing organizations. And once you visibly map those processes, patterns become impossible to ignore. Usually what shows up is that too many hands-off, unclear ownership, decision bottlenecks, duplicate approvals, rework loops, and waiting time. And a lot of the time, all this is still done manually via email. And here's the reality, like I've mentioned to you, that I guarantee you that your organization has at least 30 to 50% of those total process time that is non-value added, which is number one place where you can actually optimize and increase your profitability by reducing the amount of resources and time that it takes to nurture this non-optimized process. Not because people are inefficient to actually do your process the way it needs to be, an optimal way, but it also because it's the system that has never been potentially designed from end to end. And that's very normal for a growing business. When we start off, we usually start with one particular process, and then we add on processes, we add on departments, or we add on more responsibilities, but we seldom take a step back and actually see how that integrates into a holistic approach. So if you are that company today, I'm hoping that this workshop is going to help you to think through some of the places that you can actually be able to optimize today or start optimization today, so that you can be more profitable at the bottom line, hopefully by the next quarter. And now, once the process is mapped, the next steps is going to be to diagnose it. And this is where the three things we especially look for is your queues, rework, and structural delay drivers. Queues is where you are going to be waiting for work, right? Anything that is waiting for response or waiting for approval, any waiting time, that's your queue. And that is critical because most delays inside product organizations are really not working time. They are waiting time. A design waiting for approvals, a fit sample waiting for feedback, and a PO waiting for sign off. That is where the time disappears. And the longer queues become normalized, then more companies start really compensating it operationally. They rush decisions later, over order inventory for safety, pay for air freight, reducing testing time, simplifying approvals just to move product forward. And that's where margin starts to erode. Now let's talk about the rework as well. The rework happens when the decisions are revisited. And this is one of the largest hidden costs inside fashion businesses. Because every time work is revisited, you're paying for the same activity multiple times. And the issue is usually not execution, it is unclear decision criteria upstream. Most companies don't actually have an alignment problems, they have a decision architecture problems. It's mind-boggling that sometimes when we come into companies and we are asking them, do you guys have a RACI chart that can tell us exactly who is responsible for what decision, who is held accountable, who needs to be notified when a certain things happen? And majority of the clients that we work with, they don't even have RACI charts. Some of them don't even know what it is. And this is where the red flag starts to come up. So Do you guys have a RACI chart in your organization that helps you to define what your end-to-end process actually and who is responsible for each of those steps and accountable for? If you don't, this is a number two thing that you will do after mapping out the process and optimizing it. You're going to create yourself a RACI chart and share that with all your teams so that everyone knows where to go for which step or for who to ask for the accountability. And of course, when you are configuring your systems, this is where the trigger point starts to happen. So if we mark a status from one status to the next status, who is going to get notified and notified by automatically? And this is how we ensure that nobody misses either a change or either something that needs to be adapted or either something that got canceled and so forth. Because how many times have you experienced personally in your team where something happened and a week later, you're in the meeting and there's a bunch of people saying, well, I didn't get a notification. I did not know. Well, because no one ever had a system how to notify them automatically based on a particular trigger. People think that they are aligned because everyone attending the meeting. But alignment is not the attendance. Alignment is shared decision criteria. And then we get in structural delays, which really are tied in with, potentially having too many stakeholders in particular process or in particular decision making. Potentially, we are having, kind of undefined approval authority. We are potentially looking at poor beliefs in general throughout our company and our culture, or missing costing visibility, because often we are not able to have systems that can give you the costing visibility to all the teams that unnecessarily need to touch it and see it. Or maybe there's no escalation paths. That's another big one that we often see. And here's the important part. Most optimization really try to move faster without removing the friction first. That never works. You don't improve speed by pushing harder or pushing your team harder or asking them to work extra. You improve speed by removing the structural resistance. Now let's move into one of the most expensive operational areas inside of the product business is sampling and approvals. This builds directly on what we discussed in the earlier roundtable and throughout the year across majority of our events, because many teams believe more iterations equal better product. But in operational reality, that's often not true. More iterations usually means unresolved decisions moving down the stream. And in a highly optimized organization, sampling is not used to discover what the product should become. That work happens upstream. Sampling is actually primarily used for validating the fit consistency, tolerance, manufacturability, quality standards, or commercial readiness as one of the examples. But in many growing organizations, sampling becomes a substitute for decision making. And once that happens, multiple rounds of revisions and sampling becomes unresolved conversations that are moving through execution. And every additional sample round creates more time, more cost, more supplier bandwidth, more operational complexity. And eventually those delays compress the calendar. And compressed calendars are very expensive because this is when you start to rush with your production later on or potentially release of your collections and so forth. This is when you start airing goods instead of actually have enough time to do it ship it by ocean as an example. And then eventually the compressed calendar, right, which then directly correlates with being more expensive, is also create extra stress on your teams. Because once timelines are collapsed, companies start really compensating financially. Air freight increases, MOQ pressure increases, supplier flexibility decreases because you are constantly involving them into actually doing this while you are actually doing the revisions while they should be focusing on other things and helping you push your production forward or develop product development of your TOP samples or whatsoever. And quality risk also potentially could increase. And then when the leadership really wonders, or if you are in a leadership position and you start to wonder why margin pressure suddenly appears, the root issue usually is stated at much earlier of your process. This is why we say don't treat your symptom, right? What you're seeing on the surface. Ask your team 5 whys of why that is potentially happening to get to the bottom of the root cause. Because I guarantee you, what visibly you are thinking that what's causing your actual margin erosion is absolutely not that step. It's usually much down below where it actually started earlier, months ago, earlier, where the delays actually started to happen. So, how do strong organizations reduce this? And how do we help our clients to reduce this? We do 3 things. First, we do better inputs, not just design intent, right? But technical alignment, costing visibility, sourcing feasibility. We look at the production readiness before development accelerates. Then the second, we look at the clear decision criteria. Approvals should be based on defined standards, not opinions. And if you are starting to see that there's too many opinions going around, well, sit down, create a Kaizen event for you, with your team, and actually define among all those opinions, put all of them on the board, group them into categories, and make a decision as a team or make a decision as an organization. What is your standards? And go off of those standards. And if the standards have to shift or change because we are continuously improving it, it's okay. It's okay to do that, but it's not okay to do a reaction based on somebody else's opinion without actually validating whether this is actual what you need in order for you to get better product to your end consumer, as an example, or get the product faster to the end consumer. Some of those anomalies or one-off opinions sometimes can set off a whole operational process altogether and then cause chaos and delay. So the next thing we really look at is going to be approval standards so that they are not becoming as vague, and we are taking out any kind of emotional decision, out of the decision making, and really turning the emotional approval system to more of a systematic, standardized system. Because emotional approvals always going to end up into endless revision loop. And the third, we lock down the decisions. One of the biggest operational leak is in scaling organization is to reopening previously approved decisions. How many times have you sat in a meeting and you guys made the decisions that you're going to move forward with X? You go away from the meeting, nothing happens, or potentially you are going back into the meeting 3 weeks later and you are now revisiting the same decision that you already solidified and moved on and should have been implemented and delivered the results on that decision. This happens with all organizations, no matter how good you are. So this is the things to pay attention to. How many meetings do you have like this around decisions that never gets implemented, or you have to go back and actually revisit those decisions over and over again? That creates often instability across entire downstream process. And once invisibility become normalized, then the organization starts operationally, reactively, instead of being strategic about what they're doing and how they're going to shift. The least glamorous thing that I wanted to really talk about today is also governance around, and most important operational topic, right, for us to really talk about the governance. And we did talk about that in the roundtable. And governance often gets misunderstood. People think governance actually slows innovation. But what actually slows innovation is decision inability, or not able to actually enforce or actually implement those decisions. When teams don't know who owns the decision and when decisions are locked or what criteria defines the approval, then everything becomes negotiable. And when everything is negotiable, nothing moves cleanly. And often it just doesn't move at all. So, strong governance is not about adding bureaucracy into your organization, it's about creating clarity. And here's the 3 things strong operational governance are required: it's cadence, it's decision gates, and escalation paths. And often we have to pre-think ahead of time of different scenarios so that you have ability to capture that in your RACI chart, so that if X happens, this is the people that you're going to go to, or this is the people that needs to be notified. If Y happens, this is what happens. And cadence is your operational rhythm. And that chart, that access to that RACI chart, not only should be accessible by everyone in your organization, but it needs to be also integrated into your systems that will help you do the triggers and do notifications for you. But if you don't know what that is, then you cannot configure those systems and actually help you to do the less work, more work with less. And cadence is your operational rhythm. When teams align, when decisions happen, when reviews occur, not reactively, but in a structured way, decisions gates are checkpoints, right? Thinking about at what point do you actually need to have people, teams again, gather up and come back and report on what has happened, what the deliverability was, what the results of whatever the change potentially were, and have those checkpoints throughout your process. Not just wait till everything is done and then you're going to review it at the end of the year or review it at the end of the quarter. So, and checkpoints are also critical so that you can actually move the work forward. Not only it requires its structure to be complete, but it also allows you to make the next decision based on the results that you got within that decision gate. So thinking about throughout your organization, what types of decision gates are important and who is going to need to be involved is also going to be critical. And that's all part of your end-to-end process optimization and can be revealed at early start when you're starting to map everything out and actually doing a value chain mapping as well. And it also helps you to create the visibility and reveal some of the hidden instabilities that are potentially you're feeling and experiencing that with an organization. And then the next thing, we want to look at the escalation paths, which this is very critical, knowing what happened when something gets stuck. Because if no escalation structure exists, delays become invisible. And invisible delays are one of the biggest reasons organizations feel constantly overwhelmed. Strong governance creates visibility. Visibility creates accountability, and accountability creates speed. And that's the mentality that I want us to really think about and ask the hard question to yourself or within your organization. Do you actually have governance that allows you to know exactly what to do if something does happen, or whatever the different scenarios and risk scenarios that can potentially work through your organization or happen? So now let's bring everything together now that we're coming to the top of our hour. If you are actually redesigning your current operational model, where would you actually begin? First step, you're going to map the current state process. Not an ideal process, not what you're thinking that your process actually is, but an actual real process by involving the process users across the departments, bringing them all together and mapping it out. Step 2, you're going to identify the highest friction areas, where the time is being lost, where the approvals slow down, and where the rework repeats. Step 3, you're going to prioritize the impact. Not everything at once can be optimized. Focus first on the biggest delays, the highest cost efficiencies, and the areas creating the most downstream instabilities. And step 4 is to redesign the system. By clarifying the ownership, reducing those loops, improving the inputs, strengthening the governance, and defining the escalation process. And the step 5 is to actually pilot your change. Don't try to optimize your full process and just push it down the upstream so that it gets implemented. Take a small portion of it, take a piece, pilot it, see how it works, measure it. Potentially, you might need to make more edits, and only then you're going into full implementation. Don't try to redesign the entire organization overnight. Start with one category, one product division, or maybe one workflow. But don't forget to ensure that you then always integrate that into your end to end. And you do look at your end to end holistically and how each of those workflows, each of those processes impact your end to end and where the connections needs to reroute in order for you to avoid the loops that are potentially causing you delays, or the manual work or the manual emailing of approvals and whatsoever. With now AI that's coming into play, we see so many organizations, they're all jumping on AI integrations, building agents, allowing yourself to be able to be more efficient, to do more with less resources. But if you're doing that without understanding your process and actually optimizing your process first and defining where those AI agents or AI can actually make an impact and play a role, you're just wasting your time and resources. So this is the most important part to take away from today, that whether you're going to implement a system or whether you are in a project of creating or implementing AI within your organization, you first want to start with mapping out your process and optimizing that process first, and then bringing in the right systems that will be able to help you solve for your inefficiencies or the areas you want to automate. Not the other way around, because the other way around will lead you to fail implementations, and then also will lead you to where it actually makes things more harder. And people in your team will start resisting it and they will not want to use it. So, to wrap up our conversation, I want to leave you with one core idea. Operational efficiency is not really about speed. It's about designing a system that protects profit as the complexity increases. Because growth amplifies whatever system already exists. If the foundation is strong, growth creates scale. If the foundation is weak, growth creates operational pressure. And what we covered today is really a part of much larger conversation. A conversation around how fashion and retail companies redesign the systems behind merchandising, inventory, sourcing, supply chain, and operation decision making. So growth actually translates into profitability. And that is exactly what we're continuing to explore in our upcoming June session. On June 2nd at 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, which is the first Tuesday of the month, is when we host our executive roundtables. Unit economics for fashion brands and numbers executives must really understand is going to be the topic of our next roundtable. We'll dive deeper into contribution margin, true profitability by SKU and channel, hidden margins distortion, and why many brands are scaling revenue while quietly scaling inefficiency at the same time. And we're going to follow that with the Path to Profit session, live session that happens every third Thursday of the month. In June, it's going to be on the 18th of June at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Will we continue to discover a financial architecture deep dive for fashion and retail brands? And in that session, we'll move beyond understanding the numbers into how profitability is structurally engineered across channels, pricing systems, inventory architecture, and supply chain decisions. So, if today's conversation resonated with you, those next sections will be connecting the operational side to the business directly to the financial performance. And honestly, that's where most companies realize they don't just need better reporting, they need better operational system altogether. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being patient while we had a technical difficulty today. I'm glad we were able to resolve it. And as always, let's keep the conversation going. Feel free to ask your questions and comments below. We do answer all of them. Be sure to share this video with anyone you think that will really benefit from it. Help us spread the value that we're delivering for your businesses so that you could be able to shine and grow together with us. We look forward to see you guys in the next Path to Profit. And thank you so much for all your support. And it's really valuable for us to hear your responses as well as your feedback, because then we know that we're bringing value every day. And if you have any specific topic you would like us to cover in our next upcoming live events, feel free to send us a message, or again, put a comment below. We would love to create new sessions around the problems that you guys are experiencing. So I'd love to hear from you all the time. Thank you, everyone, and I will speak with you soon.